Hi, everybody. All right, in this lecture, we are going to be talking about how to evaluate different sources. And in this case, we're not just looking at, is this source scholarly? Instead, we're looking at it in a different way. So you should have by now read the section in your textbook about evaluation, and hopefully that'll help you to get an idea of sort of what we're looking at. Your next essay also focuses on evaluating a few different sources. So I wanted to give you some practice and an example of what that looks like. So that's what we're doing today. Remember the basics of evaluation. So evaluations happen in everyday arguments. This is what we do when we apply criteria and we make decisions based on that criteria. So criteria can be anything. They're the standards that you use to help you evaluate. And remember that these vary a lot depending on what we're evaluating, right? My criteria for what makes a good ice cream is going to be a lot different than my criteria for maybe, who I trust to babysit my children, right? So criteria can be relaxed and kind of casual, or they can be more, more serious and things that we really need to consider deeply before we decide those things. Additionally, there are a couple of different types of evaluations that the book discusses. So we've got quantitative evaluations, and these typically involve criteria that we can measure in concrete ways. And they're pretty objective rather than subjective. So for example, a car's speed, how high something is. Those are things that we can measure and put a number on, and they're not very debatable, right? Generally, if we say this car can go this many miles per hour, that's just something we accept. On the other hand, we have qualitative evaluations, and those involve criteria that is subjective, like my favorite kind of ice cream, things that I think are beautiful, or something that I feel tastes good, right? Those are things that are going to be different for everybody, so they're subjective. And also, they can't be measured in concrete ways. They involve things like morals, values, and beliefs. So again, some examples: which type of music is best, whether puppies are cuter than kittens. You can kind of discuss those and debate, about how do we measure those things. So those are qualitative evaluations. Evaluation arguments can use one of those, particular types of evaluation, or they can use both. So keep that in mind as we're evaluating things and sort of looking at arguments carefully. When we're developing an evaluative argument, we should look at developing some claims about the topic at hand. And the way that we develop claims for this particular type of argument is that we're going to be using criteria. And you can choose your criteria, but you want to make sure that you're choosing it carefully. You want to, make sure that you are choosing criteria that your audience is going to value, choosing criteria that is appropriate for the assignment in this case. Once you've developed your criteria and sort of what am I going to look at to help me decide if this thing is doing a good job or not, right? That's the criteria. Then you'll need to choose evidence to support your claims. And of course, we want to make sure that our evidence and the criteria sort of match up, right? So for instance, if we're looking at what makes a source credible, some of the criteria we can use are these things here: currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So when we're doing an evaluative sort of writing and evaluative sort of thinking for our class, this is a great set of criteria that you can use. And so that's the set of criteria that I'm going to use for this example, just to show you sort of what that looks like when we evaluate a source using all of these different types of criteria. So when you're evaluating sources for your essay, remember that we're evaluating each source to see what each one brings to our overall understanding. Remember that you're evaluating sources that we have already looked at in class. So I have given you those sources that you're using for this essay. And your overall goal is to evaluate all of the sources you've chosen and discuss them in a cohesive way that helps readers see how each one helps us better understand the topic. And for your particular assignment in this essay, you only need to choose about 3 to 4 sources from our evaluation unit and focus on those in your essay. So we have lots and lots of sources. You do not have to fit all of them into your essay. Remember to read, annotate, and evaluate each source separately before you start planning the essay. That way you know what you have to say, you can get a better picture of how they fit together, and then you'll be better prepared to actually start evaluating them in an essay format. So we're going to practice today with post-princess models of gender. This is one of the articles that you've read for class at this point. If you haven't read it by now, you should go ahead and try and give that a read and annotate it before you continue on with this lecture. I think it'll be more helpful if you've already read it. So if I were evaluating this source in preparation for this essay, what I'd start by doing is reading and annotating the source so I have a good understanding of what the topic is and what the author's claims are. Then I would decide what criteria I'm going to use to evaluate the source. And then I'm going to complete my evaluation and choose which points I want to use in my essay. So let's take a look at what that stuff all means and kind of what this looks like. So annotating. If you're not familiar with annotating a source, remember that there are lots of different ways to annotate. This is just one example of how you could annotate. Oops, there we go. But you should remember to write as you're reading. We want to interact with the text by asking questions, highlighting main points, writing notes in the margins. And in terms of, evaluating a text, specifically while I'm annotating, I'm going to look for my criteria that I'm using and be, practicing that evaluation as I read. So remember the example criteria that we're using here is the CRAP test, right? So currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. I'm looking for all of those things as I'm annotating, as I'm reading each source. So here's my criteria. Remember that currency talks about how timely this information is. Relevance talks about the importance of it. So how relevant is this? Authority refers to the author and the source. So, how authoritative do I find this particular source? Are they credible? Accuracy looks at how accurate the information provided is, right? Do they back up their claims with evidence? Is that evidence accurate? Those kinds of things. And then purpose. Look at the reason why this information exists, because we know that every author has a purpose. So how does that author's purpose affect their message or their credibility and those kinds of things? So these are the criteria that I'm going to be using as we look at this particular article. All right, so if I'm looking at post-princess models of gender in terms of its currency, I'll notice that it's published in 2010, right? So it's not super current. It's a pretty old article. However, the issues addressed are still relevant, so that's something to consider. Next, I'm going to move on to relevance. So this is just an example from the text. So in my opinion, it looks like it's pretty relevant to the topic because it does examine how movies, which are popular culture, can show audiences different types of gender roles if they choose to. It also uses lots of evidence, like this example here, to help readers see how pop culture can reflect and influence us in the real world. So it seems like it is relevant to the topic at hand. one of the drawbacks in terms of relevance is that it does focus on Pixar movies, right? So if people who don't have kids or who just aren't interested in this type of movie or haven't seen those movies are reading the article, that might make it difficult for someone to follow this, train of thought or to be invested in talking about this. So that's kind of a mark against it for relevance. The next thing I'm going to look at is the authority. So when I'm looking at the authority of a particular article, I'm going to do a little bit of Googling of the article's authors, right? In this case, we've got two authors, Shannon Wooden and Ken Gillum. And I looked at both of those individuals. I read their backgrounds and their bios to see sort of what kinds of degrees they have, what sorts of things they have written, and where their work has been published. Where are they working now? And then made some decisions about how reputable and authoritative I find those people. So, in my opinion, it looks like both authors are still researching, they're both writing, they're still working in their fields. So, all of that stuff lends them some credibility. So, I would say they're experts in this particular, topic. So, their opinions are pretty valuable. The next thing I'm going to look at is accuracy. So the information in the article does align with what a lot of other people have to say about how popular culture can affect us. So that's a sign of accuracy. And I included a picture of part of their works cited page here. So often you'll see that in a reputable source, what happens is researchers are not just researching in a bubble somewhere, right? They're relying on lots of other research. They're looking at what other people have to say about this topic, and not just other people in general, but other experts in their field, other respected researchers. And then they cite those people. And again, lots of this stuff is old because the article was written a while ago. So that's something to consider. But it is important to notice that they did research and they do rely on and cite all of these things in their article. So it's not just them saying, hey, I think this is going on. It's them saying, I think this is going on, and here's why. And here are lots of other people who say that these things are happening as well. So that all lends to the article's accuracy. So all of those claims being supported with outside research from other credible sources, all of those things are important for accuracy. Another thing I'm going to look at when I read any article and am evaluating it is purpose. So what is the author's purpose? Why are they writing this article? The purpose here seems to be mainly educational. They want to educate people about what is going on in the movies, right? So what's happening with characters? How are characters changing with the times? And how does that affect, the impact of seeing those characters, as children and as we grow up and those kinds of things. So the authors do seem to be biased because they believe that this is a problem from the start, right? They believe that traditional roles that we saw in older movies are problematic. And they come to this with that belief. So they are a little bit biased. However, everybody's got their own beliefs and their own biases, and that's a pretty normal thing to encounter, right? And at least they're not like hiding this. It's clear from the beginning that they believe this is a problem, and they're happy that Pixar is, starting to challenge some of those gender roles. Their beliefs are supported with evidence throughout, so that's a good thing. And it does help for those beliefs to, try to educate. So I'm looking carefully at the purpose as I'm reading. And this, again, is just a screenshot of the article where they kind of make their purpose known. All right, so if I was going to evaluate this, some pros. It passes the CRAP test, right? So it brings an overall broad understanding of the issue. Overall, it's got credibility and those kinds of things. It educates us about who, where, and why these things are happening. We see lots of outside examples. It does a good job of educating because it does define lots of specialized terms that we need and things like that. Some cons. The article is old, right? It's pretty old. It's from 2010. Things might have changed in some places. So a lot of what they're saying, was new at the time in 2010 might be a lot more commonplace now, for instance.